Hi, my name is Brian, and I'm going to show you how to change the wheel bearings on a 1987 Porsche 944 Naturally Aspirated. There's another really great YouTube video out there, but that gentleman is using a turbo, and what I noticed is that his wheel calipers and his setup was just a little bit different from mine, so I figured I'd go ahead and shoot this video. The way I do it works for me. If you have access to a press, that is the right way to do it. However, the most important thing is that you do it right, and it's better to have new bearings than worn out bearings. So, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to use power tools. That's what they're good for. And first thing I'm going to do is loosen my lug nut. In an ideal world, you'd probably use jack stands. It's not an ideal world, and I find that this is more than sufficient for what I'm also careful not to get underneath the car wall. The idea is you nudge it a little bit with each tap, and it'll eventually pop right off. So go ahead and inspect the inside of this. There's nothing really funky or nasty in here, so that's a good thing. And I'm going to set this off to the side. Next up, I'm going to remove the brake caliper, and I'm going to shift the camera so you can see better. Now, this is my project car. I actually enjoy working on cars, so that's part of the reason I own this car. And that's a good thing, because this car needs a lot of work most of the time. I often joke that 944 stands for 9 hours of driving and 44 hours of work. It's not quite that bad, but it does require a lot of work. I find this is easier to do with a pair of pliers. First thing to do is remove this spring clip that locks the retaining pins in. Now, if you are younger or you have really good hands, you probably don't need a pair of small needle nose pliers, but I'm getting a little older and I find it's easier to do things with the right tools. And just trying to budge them loose, and I'm actually going to use a pair of vice grips and just pull them. And there's that clip. And at this point, what I want to do is extract my brake pads. Now, I've already done the other side of this vehicle, so my brake system shouldn't be that tight. Anything is fair game for this. The idea is just to get the pad out. As you can see, gently prying works just fine. Once I've got it out far enough, I'll grab it with my vice grips. There is a little clip on the back here. Let's see if this does what I think it does. I'm going to carefully remove this. This is a brake pad wear sensor. I'm actually going to stow it. The other one is actually wrapped up. And so I'm going to wrap this one up and see if we can just make that stop functioning. Problem I have with that sensor is it's an expensive part, and I don't let my brakes go that often without looking at them. Now, you'll see some people use a piece of string. I prefer to use just an inexpensive 12-inch bungee strap. So I'm just going to position it here loosely. This is a 19mm socket. This is one of the other things different about how my brake calipers are held on. This is more like what I would expect on an American car. And these are quite difficult to get to. So I'm breaking them loose with the hammer. Try to keep myself out of the line of fall in case the car slips. I don't recommend working on a car while it's up on a jack. I'm taking a shortcut. So, as my dad sometimes says, do as I say, not as I do. This is a torque problem, so I have attached, I can't find my breaker bar, so I'm using an inexpensive torque wrench. There we go. It was just over 100 pounds of torque. I have multiple torque wrenches. This is a $9 special from Harbor Freight. I have it set for lug nuts, and that's what I use it for. It doubles as a great breaker bar. Thank you, Harbor Freight. Alright, so after a lot of huffing and puffing, we're getting close to having this off here. Looks like it's about to come off. So, I'll explain this in just a second. You know, this might have been easier if I'd removed the other one, but as they say, one thing at a time. So, that'll hold that up there. This is a combination that fits in there. You need to use a 3/8" extension in order to get past some of the hardware, and then I'm using 1/2" drive tools. Now at this point you're going to need a 6mm Allen wrench, and this is my 6mm Allen wrench. There is a captive or clamping bolt here. It's really a great way to do this. So you undo this 3 or 4 turns, and then use a flat tip screwdriver to turn the clamping nut. Now, ordinarily you could check your bearings this way, but the other set of bearings was bad, and so I'm going to go ahead and replace this set of bearings regardless of what I find in here. So I'm going ahead and just taking this off. And this is what I keep the cap handy for. This grease is a little broken down, it's a little runny, but it's not the end of the world. I always recommend having a shop towel around. Don't let your wife or your partner see you using nice towels, or you may be in trouble. And I'm not responsible if you get yelled at for using the good towels. This is a keyed washer. This is one of the other things different. This washer is not going to spin. This is my first set of bearings, or my outer bearing. It's a little bit on the loose side, but it's not in bad shape. Its only real offense is that it's high mileage. It's an SKF bearing if it's anything like the one on the other side. And normally it's stamped in here or etched in here. It says SKF Germany. This one doesn't say anything. So I'm going to just set it down. then there is my seal in my other bearing. You will need an impact screwdriver. You can get one at Harbor Freight for $7.99. No, I don't work there, but I couldn't find one of these anywhere for less than $30. So this is the first time I've ever used one, and it may be a while before I use one again. So you just turn this, and unfortunately these screws are not going to come out by normal means, so I'm going to have to drill them out. So I did order replacement screws from my favorite supplier, Auto Atlanta, and they're $1 a piece, well worth it. This is a drill gauge. It tells me that this screw is most similar to 15/64, so 1/4 inch bit should work very nicely to drill this out. Trick here is to remove the screw and not the hub. I'm using this piece of wood here to keep so I don't beat up the hub. A brake job is not very far off in the future on this car, but that is not today's project. Okay, so now I'm going to remove the seal. You know, in theory you could use a seal puller. I don't have one, so I'm going to use a 1 1/16 inch wrench. Just drive it into the seal and then pop it down. There are other ways to do this. This is what works for me, and I'm sharing it with you. If you don't like it, don't use it on your car. Now, there are different ways to do this. I'm going to use a torch to heat it up, so at this point I have cleaned the majority of the grease off of my hub. And I want to get it to about 250 degrees. I'll know it's at temperature when the water is gone. Okay, this doesn't really take that long, so I'm almost to where I need to be. And use a brass drift, which is basically a piece of brass rod, to remove this. There are 2 channels in here. There we go. And the key here is you just want to walk it down gently. You do not want to get it moving and then hammer it out because you'll damage your hub. And just as there are multiple ways to do this, I use a welding glove to handle my hub when it's hot. And I'm going to heat the outer part because that's the race I'm going to remove next. Okay, we'll see if this works a little better now that it's been ground. This is kind of the hub from hell, folks. I'll be back in a minute. Alright, I kind of had to really get after this with a hammer, but it is going to pop out here in a second. There we have it. and this was my solution to being able to hold the rod with more accuracy. So I'm gonna put it in the parts washer again, and then we'll press the new races in. Okay, so I've got all the tools that are necessary. I'm gonna warm up my hub just a little bit. This expands the aluminum and makes it a little easier to get the steel race in. Now, you can freeze the race. I'm not going to do it because I really don't think it makes that big of a difference in this particular instance. And instead what I'm going to do is just make sure my hub is nice and warm. Aluminum is a fantastic conductor, so it very rapidly and quickly absorbs heat. That should be sufficient. And then I'm going to handle this from the inside and set it in here as square as possible. I've already pre-assembled my And what I'm doing, folks, is I'm looking at the back side of the race and making sure it's sitting against the machined face of the hub. Okay, so again, I'm just warming up my hub to make it a little easier to do this. That's good. When you insert your race, make sure the flat side is on the inside. This is my outer race. I'm going to hold it like this. It makes it easier to position it in here without burning my fingers. And then I'm going to use my bearing placement tool. Now, one of the things I'm doing at this point is I've already cleaned off my spindle, so I'm going to go ahead and inspect my spindle. I'm doing it by hand because if there's any burrs, I'll feel them. The bearings actually run against this portion of the spindle, and I'm checking where the oil seal goes, and now I'm going to visually inspect it. And what I'm looking for here are patterns and discoloration. You know, it's 26, 27, or 25-year-old car, so it does have some wear on it, but it's definitely serviceable. There's nothing. You'll feel a burr with your hand before you'll probably see it. So I'm going to pack the bearing. I wear gloves because these things are really cheap. First thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grease where the oil seal goes, or grease seal goes, and this is on the spindle, so I just take a little dab of grease and put it on where the seal goes. That ensures I won't have problems with it later. And then I'm going to take a big glob of it and stick it in my hand. And because I'm doing the inner bearing, which is larger, I'm then just going to pack the bearing by hand. There are tools that do this, but essentially you just push the grease into the bearing. That's why it's called packing. And when you see it come out through the cracks, you know you've got enough in there. It's a messy process, but you know, gloves are really cheap. And now I'm going to pre-fit my oil seal, make sure that I don't have any problems. And then I'm going to use my bearing driver, and I'm going to make it upside down. I'm actually going to use a larger one. If you don't own a set of these, don't worry. You can typically, auto parts stores will loan them to you when you buy parts from them. This one came from AutoZone. I give them a deposit, and this one's a little chewed up. It's seen better days, but I give them a deposit and they loan the tool to me. And this allows me to accurately and safely place the seal on. Now, the temptation is probably to go ahead and pack the inner bearing and put it on, but that would actually be wrong. What you want to do is take your hub, which is halfway together. You have a seal and an inner bearing, but you haven't done anything to the outer bearing. You actually want to install this at this point. And very carefully work your way in. One thing I want to do beforehand is put some grease on that shaft. I'm honestly not really sure what this does, because on both shafts I ended up pulling this grease off, but I guess if you were to develop a grease seal leak, this would provide some extra lubricant. And so what I'm going to do is just lather this real nice with grease. It'll also put a little bit extra grease on the inside of the bearings. Okay, and at that point, that's installed. So what I'm going to do now is pack the inner bearing, and then I'll install that. I think the best place to buy these gloves is actually Home Depot. They sell them in a package of about 100 or 200 for just a few dollars. So what I'm doing is pushing my bearing in by hand. I'm going to get it seated all the way up in here. Now I'm going to take a rag and I'm going to clean this up a little bit. And there are different ways to do this. Again, this is what works for me. This is a keyed washer, so I'm just going to insert this up against the bearing, and I'm going to take my nut and I'm just going to wipe it off. It's going right back into a greased environment, so it'll be just fine. I'm going to take care to thread this accurately. At this point, I'm done with my gloves, and I'm going to use a screwdriver to gently spin this. Now you could use your hands, but these threads are probably a little bit on the sharp side, and it's a good way to get hurt. So that spins easily. What I'm going to do is take my vice grips now. You could use channel locks. I like vice grips because I can adjust them and ensure that I'm not really squeezing on the nut. And what I'm going to do is seat the bearing, and you do that by turning this until it gets hard to turn. Okay, and then you back it off a quarter of a turn. And I'm checking for play. If it's not preloaded properly, it won't have play. And then you turn this to where you can access the Allen screw. And you tighten it up. And I'm holding it with my finger because I don't want the nut to take off on me. Okay, so at that point, that's done. I'll go ahead and reinstall my grease cap. Use a soft hammer. I don't hear any noise. That's actually what I'm checking for. So at this point, I'm going to readjust the camera, and then I'll reinstall the brake caliper. Now, I'm not installing the two screws because I drilled them out. And I've temporarily installed one bolt, and what I'm going to do is put Loctite, just a little bit of blue Loctite on the other bolt, and then I'm going to install it in the bottom. And this just makes sure these don't back out on me. Now I'll do the other bolt. I find it easier to do it this way so that I don't have to worry about having Loctite on my bolt and trying to maneuver it at the same time while I'm trying to hold the caliper. And then again, this is a 19mm socket. I have a torque wrench that's set to the appropriate torque specification, which is 63 foot-pounds. And this is a much nicer torque wrench. It's a little higher precision than the one from Harbor Freight. One of the things I like to do is periodically stop and put things back together a little bit, put things away. Helps make my work area neater. I have deliberately not reinstalled the brake wear indicator. I don't feel like replacing that part, and I check my brakes more often than that. I don't like to use a screwdriver as a pry, so I use a wrench instead. I always install the outer pad first. As you can see, that helps. So I'm using the pins to assist my alignment. Okay, so once they can be aligned, then what I'll do is use my vice grips to maneuver my pins so I can insert my springs. And it makes it easier to do if the pins have been fully inserted. They'll kind of hold the calipers in place. And the way this works is these pins hold the calipers from going in and out too far. And then I will use this to reattach these. Be right back. And one last tip on this, I use my vice grips to turn the head of the pin, and I use these to insert the pin in the spring in the pin, and that makes reassembly easier for me. Your mileage may vary. Okay, at this point what's left is to reinstall the tire. There we go. Always start your lug nuts by hand. Now it's important to torque your lug nuts to make sure that they're on there properly. I use the impact wrench as sort of a shortcut so I don't have to do this by hand quite as much. And the torque setting is 96 pounds according to my Haynes manual. And I always check them twice. One thing I also like to do is double check that my setting has not shifted while I was torquing them, and I'm going to do it one more time. Alright, well, here you have it. That's the completion of my bearing job, and now I'm going to pull the car out. I will carefully test the brakes before I move the car. Thanks for watching.